There is a time, an appointed time, a time when the heavens move, when the unseen is revealed, when what has been hidden comes to the light. And God is saying 3 days. 3 days before the shift. 3 days before the unveiling. 3 days before the doors that were closed will either swing open or be sealed shut. 3 days. You know what that means in the scriptures? 3 days mark the moment before transformation. It was in 3 days that Jonah was in the belly of the great fish before he was set free. In 3 days, the Israelites stood at the banks of the Jordan before stepping into the promise. And it was on the 3rd day that the stone was rolled away and death lost its power. So why 3 days? Because 3 days signify the process of breaking, testing, and resurrection. When God says 3 days, he is saying, prepare, the change is coming. Right now, you are standing in a place of waiting. Some of you feel the pressure, the shaking, the uncertainty. You have prayed and it feels like heaven has been silent. But hear this, God has already set the time. The moment of your shift is not far. It is only 3 days away. But what will happen in 3 days? For some, it will be the end of a battle. The chains that held you will break. The sickness that plagued you will weaken. The sorrow that followed you will lift. For others, it will be the unveiling. God will expose what was hidden, revealing the truth. Doors will open that no man can shut, and opportunities that seemed impossible will be laid before you. But listen closely. 3 days can also mean judgment. When God speaks of 3 days, it is a time of testing, separating those who believe from those who do not. When Israel stood before the Red Sea, some doubted, some feared, but those who held their faith saw the waters part. What must you do? Prepare yourself. Position your heart in prayer. Remove doubt, remove fear. Remove distractions. Because what is coming is not small, it is divine, it is supernatural, it is the movement of heaven on earth. In 3 days, the story changes. In 3 days, the grave opens. In 3 days, God moves. Throughout Scripture, God moves in cycles of 3 days. It is not by accident, nor is it by coincidence. There is a pattern, a divine blueprint woven into time itself, where the number 3 represents transformation, resurrection, and divine intervention. When God sets the time for 3 days, it is a sign that something is about to shift, that the heavens are about to move, and that what was hidden is about to be revealed. Look at Jonah, a prophet who ran from his calling, swallowed up by the great fish. For 3 days and 3 nights he was trapped in the depths, in the darkness, in the place where it seemed there was no way out. But on the 3rd day, the fish could hold him no longer. It was not just a moment of deliverance, it was a moment of transformation. Jonah did not come out the same man who went in. He was broken, humbled, and realigned with the will of God. 3 days in the belly of the great fish, and he was made into a new vessel for God's purpose. Then there was Israel, standing before the greatest transition of their lives. They had wandered in the wilderness. They had fought battles. They had endured trials. But before they could enter the promised land, they had to wait. 3 days. God told them to prepare, to consecrate themselves, to make ready their hearts, because after 3 days they would cross the Jordan into the land that had been promised. 3 days was the separation between wandering and walking into destiny. 3 days was the gap between the past and the future, between bondage and inheritance. And then the greatest of them all, the Messiah himself, Jesus, the Son of God, betrayed, crucified, laid in a tomb. For 3 days, the world waited in silence. Darkness covered the hearts of his disciples. Fear gripped the people, and it seemed as if hope had died. But on the 3rd day, the grave lost its hold. On the 3rd day, the stone was rolled away. On the 3rd day, death was swallowed up in victory. The power of 3 days was not just resurrection, it was the fulfillment of every promise God had ever made. It was the proof that what he says will come to pass, and no force in heaven or earth can stop it. 3 days is not a delay, it is a divine process. It is the time between the breaking and the breakthrough. It is the moment of testing before the unveiling. It is the final preparation before the manifestation. When God moves in 3 days, it is because something must be completed. Something must be shifted. Something must be made ready for the fulfillment of His word. And so, if God has spoken 3 days over your life, do not fear. If you are in the place of waiting, if you are in the place of darkness, if you are in the place where nothing seems to move, know this: the third day is coming. What has been buried will rise. What has been bound will be loosed. What has been delayed will be released. The story is not over. It is only waiting for the third day. Before every breakthrough, there is a time of testing, a time of breaking, a time when everything seems uncertain. It is the pattern of God woven into the fabric of His divine plan. No great move of God comes without preparation. No transition happens without a shaking. The Israelites stood at the edge of their promised land, but before they could step in, they were commanded to wait 3 days. It was a time of consecration, a time of separation, a time when faith was tested. They could see the land, they could see the promise, but they had not yet entered. 3 days stood between them and destiny. Esther, chosen by God to deliver her people, faced a moment of decision. The decree of death had gone forth, and her people were marked for destruction. But before she could stand before the king, before deliverance could come, there had to be a breaking. She called for a fast, 3 days without food, 3 days without water, 3 days of pressing into God. She knew that favor does not come without preparation, that breakthrough does not come without sacrifice, and on the third day, she arose. On the third day, she stepped forward. On the third day, the decree of death began to unravel. What is breaking in your life right now? What is shaking? What feels like it is crumbling before your eyes? Do not be afraid, for the breaking is not the end. It is the beginning. When God allows something to break, it is because He is making way for something greater. Before the Israelites crossed the Jordan, the old had to be left behind. Before Esther could walk in her destiny, fear had to be broken. The breaking is painful, but it is necessary. When Jesus took the bread, He blessed it. But before it could feed the multitudes, He had to break it. Blessing comes before breaking, but breaking comes before multiplication. Some of you are in that place right now. You have been praying for breakthrough, but instead things are falling apart. You have been believing for open doors, but instead you are facing resistance. But hear this: the breaking is the sign that something is about to be birthed. A mother knows that before the child is born, there is pain. Before new life comes forth, there is labor. The breaking you are experiencing is not death. It is the process of new life being formed. Do not run from it. Do not fear it, for after the breaking comes the breakthrough. 3 days, that is all it takes. 3 days for what seemed dead to come alive. 3 days for what was lost to be restored. 3 days for the trial to turn into testimony. Whatever you are walking through, know that God is at work. Your breaking will not be in vain. Your testing will not last forever. The third day is coming, and when it does, the very thing that tried to break you will be the thing that reveals God's power in your life. Hold on, for the time is near. There is an appointed time for everything under heaven, and when God moves in 3 days, He shakes what needs to be shaken. It is not a random shaking, not an aimless disruption, but a divine rearranging. The shaking of God is not meant to destroy, but to align. It is the process by which He removes what cannot stand so that only what is unshakable remains. In the natural, it may look like things are falling apart, but in the spiritual, God is putting things into place. Before Israel could enter the promised land, there was a shaking. The walls of Jericho stood in their way, but they were never meant to last. God gave them a command: march! Obey, trust. And on the appointed time, at the right moment, the walls did not gradually crumble. They fell suddenly, completely. The shaking of Jericho was not destruction for Israel. It was the final barrier to their destiny being removed. When Jesus was crucified, the earth itself responded. The sky darkened. The veil in the temple was torn, and the ground shook. To those watching, it looked like everything had collapsed. Their Messiah was dead. Their hope shattered. But in reality, God was shaking the foundations of the world, tearing down the barriers between man and Himself. What seemed like loss was actually the beginning of victory. So why does God shake things? Because there are things in your life that cannot go with you into your next season. There are relationships that must be removed, habits that must be broken, comforts that must be stripped away. If it is being shaken, it is because it was never meant to be permanent. If it is falling apart, it is because God is making room for something greater. The shaking is uncomfortable. It does not come with warning. It does not ask for permission. It arrives suddenly, turning what was stable into uncertainty. But understand this. God never shakes without purpose. He never allows loss without preparing gain. He never closes a door without planning an open one ahead. Some of you are in that shaking right now. The job you depended on is gone. The people you trusted have walked away. The plans you made have crumbled, and the enemy whispers that this is your end. But hear the word of the Lord. This is not your end. This is your beginning. The shaking is the evidence that God is moving. The shaking is the sign that what is coming is greater than what was lost. 3 days, that is all it takes. 3 days for the grave to lose its power. 3 days for the stone to be rolled away. 3 days for sorrow to turn into rejoicing. Whatever is shaking in your life, do not fear. God is in control. What remains after the shaking will be unshakable. What stands after the storm will be eternal. Your destiny is not being destroyed, it is being revealed. Hold fast, for your appointed time is near. There comes a moment in time when God separates the faithful from the fearful. A moment when what is hidden in the heart is revealed. A moment when trust is tested, when belief is measured, and when obedience is required. 3 days is not just a period of waiting. It is a divine dividing line, a threshold between those who will walk forward in faith and those who will fall back in fear. When the Israelites stood at the Jordan River, they had already witnessed the power of God. They had seen the plagues in Egypt, the parting of the Red Sea, and manna falling from heaven. But now they stood at another crossing. The land was in sight, but the water stood in their way. And before they could step in, God commanded them to wait 3 days. Not because he was uncertain, not because he needed time, but because the waiting would reveal who truly trusted him. Would they believe that he would make a way, or would they allow fear to take hold? 3 days is the time that separates the ones who stand firm from the ones who waver. The ones who say, God has spoken and I will trust him, from the ones who say, what if nothing happens? It was the same with Gideon's army. Thousands came to fight, but God said there are too many, so he gave them a test. Those who were afraid were sent home, and only those who remained steadfast in heart were chosen. Not everyone who starts the journey will finish. Not everyone who hears the word will believe. And not everyone who stands on the edge of the promise will have the faith to step forward. Even Jesus, before his resurrection, witnessed the dividing line of faith. For 3 days the disciples were tested. Would they remember his words? Would they believe the promise? Some hid, some doubted, some gave in to fear, but there were a few who held on, a few who still believed even when they did not understand. And so it is today. When God speaks a word over your life, when he declares that something is about to happen, there will always be a period of testing. You will not see the full picture. You will not know all the details. You will stand before the unknown, and in that moment, you will either trust or fear. And look at your life right now. Are you standing in a season of waiting? Are you at the edge of something greater, yet uncertainty surrounds you? Do not let fear rule you. Fear will tell you to turn back. Fear will tell you to doubt. Fear will make you hesitate when God is calling you to move forward. But faith says, even when I do not see it, I believe. Faith says, even when I do not understand, I trust. Faith says, if God has spoken, then he will do it. 3 days will reveal who you truly are. When the time comes, will you be found among the faithful, or will you shrink back in fear? The choice is yours. The time is near. Stand firm, for your moment is at hand. There is a moment when everything changes. A moment when the waiting ends, when the night turns into morning, when the promise of God that seemed distant suddenly becomes reality. That moment is the third day. When God sets a time of 3 days, it is not random. It is the appointed time of fulfillment, the time when what was hidden is revealed, when what was bound is loosed, when what was lost is restored. Look through the scriptures and you will see it. 3 days is the pattern of divine reversal, the moment when God takes what seems dead and brings it back to life. Jonah spent 3 days in the belly of the great fish, swallowed by the depths, surrounded by darkness. It seemed like the end, but on the third day he was released. The grave could not hold him because God had already determined the time of deliverance. Abraham, walking up the mountain with Isaac, faced the ultimate test of faith. For 3 days he carried the weight of what seemed like an impossible sacrifice. But on the third day, God provided a ram in the thicket. That his descendants would be as numerous as the stars was never in danger. It was always secure, even in the moment of trial. And then, the greatest unveiling of all, the resurrection. Jesus, the Son of God, crucified, buried, sealed in a tomb. The world thought it was over. The enemy believed he had won. But what they did not understand was that the promise was already set in motion. On the third day, the stone was rolled away. On the third day, death lost its power. On the third day, the impossible became possible. What does this mean for you? It means that no matter how dark your situation looks right now, no matter how impossible it seems, your third day is coming. The things in your life that appear finished, the dreams that seem buried, the prayers that feel unanswered, God has already appointed a moment of unveiling. Some of you have been in a season of waiting. You have been crying out, wondering when the breakthrough will come. You have seen no movement, no change, and the enemy whispers, "It is over." But he is a liar. If God has spoken a promise over your life, it must come to pass. Do not be discouraged by what you see right now. The grave was still sealed on the first day. The disciples were still hiding on the second. But by the third day, everything shifted. Chains break, doors open. The impossible becomes possible. This is the season of unveiling. The things that have been hidden in the Spirit are about to manifest in the natural. What God spoke in secret, He is about to reveal in the open. The prayers you prayed in the midnight hour are about to be answered in the daylight. The waiting has not been in vain. Hold on, your third day is near. What you thought was dead will rise. What seemed lost will be restored. The promise is not forgotten. The unveiling is at hand. When God speaks, He does not speak in vain. When He gives a warning, it is not to stir fear, but to stir preparation. He declares what is to come, so that those who have ears to hear may be ready. If He says something will happen in 3 days, it means the time is short, the moment is near, and now is the hour to position yourself. Look through the scriptures and you will see this truth. When God called Israel to cross the Jordan, He did not tell them to move immediately. He told them to wait for 3 days. Why? Because before they could step into the promise, they had to prepare their hearts. The land was before them, but they could not take it without consecration. The promise was ready for them, but they had to be ready for the promise. When Esther heard of the decree of death against her people, she did not rush into the king's presence unprepared. She called for a fast for 3 days of seeking God, humbling herself, aligning her spirit. She understood that before deliverance comes, there must be preparation. Before God moves, there must be readiness. And then there was Nineveh. When Jonah walked through the city proclaiming that judgment would come in 40 days, the people did not ignore the warning. They repented, they fasted, they turned their hearts back to God, and because they responded, mercy was given. God does not warn without reason, and He does not delay without purpose. The warnings of God are not meant to frighten, but to awaken. So what about now? If God is saying something will happen in 3 days, what does that mean for you? It means this is not the time to be distracted. This is not the time to delay. This is not the time to assume that tomorrow will always be there. It is time to prepare, to align, to set your heart in the right place. It is time to repent of anything that separates you from Him. It is time to seek him with urgency, to remove what hinders, to strengthen what remains. The world moves in chaos, but those who walk with God do not move in fear, they move in wisdom. The shaking that is coming is not meant to destroy you, but to position you. The shift that is taking place is not an accident, but a divine appointment. The question is, will you be ready? Will you be found watching when the time comes? Will you be positioned when the door opens? The foolish virgins in the parable of Jesus heard the same call as the wise ones, but when the moment arrived, they were not ready. They were not prepared, and because of that, they missed what was meant for them. Do not let that be your story. If God is speaking, respond. If he is calling, answer. If he is warning, prepare. The time is at hand. The moment is near. Those who have ears to hear, let them hear. What is coming is not to harm you, but to align you. Be ready, for the appointed hour is near. Throughout Scripture, God has moved in cycles of 3 days, times of testing, breaking, shaking, refining, unveiling, and preparation. 3 days is not just a passage of time. It is a divine pattern, a moment of transformation, a shift from the old to the new. When God declares that something will happen in 3 days, it is a call to awaken, to watch, to prepare. It is the moment when the faithful are separated from the fearful, when chains are broken, when the impossible becomes possible. You may be in a season of waiting, wondering when the breakthrough will come. You may feel the shaking, the breaking, the refining of God's process, but do not fear, for the breaking is a sign of birthing. The shaking is a sign of shifting. The waiting is a sign of alignment. And the third day is coming. What seems lost will be restored. What seems dead will rise. The promise will be unveiled, and those who are prepared will walk into their appointed moment. Now is not the time to hesitate. Now is the time to position yourself, to step forward in faith, to trust in the God who has already written the end from the beginning. He does not warn without purpose. He does not speak without fulfilling his word. The hour is near. The call has gone forth. The only question is, will you be ready? May you stand firm. May you walk in faith. May you be found among the faithful when the time comes. Thank you.